I watched in horror as Corinne directed three men with crowbars to rip apart my fence. My goats scattered in panic, bleating frantically as they ran toward the busy road. One of them, Daisy, stumbled and nearly fell under the wheels of a speeding pickup truck. "Stop!" I screamed, running toward the chaos. "You have no right to do this." Corinne turned to me with that cold smile I had come to hate. She held up a piece of paper like it was a weapon. "I have every right. This is an emergency HOA action." But I knew the truth. Corinne had no authority. She was just a neighbor drunk on imaginary power, and she had just committed a crime that could have killed my animals. As I gathered my terrified goats in my arms, one thought burned in my mind. This was war, and Corinne had no idea what she had just unleashed. 6 months earlier, I stood in the morning sunlight on my new property, breathing in the fresh air and feeling like the luckiest person alive. After years of apartment living, I finally owned my own piece of land. 3 acres of rolling grass, mature oak trees, and enough space to live the dream I had carried since childhood. I wanted to raise goats, not for profit, not for business, just for the pure joy of caring for these intelligent, gentle animals. I had researched everything: proper nutrition, housing requirements, fencing specifications, and most importantly, all the local laws and HOA regulations. My property sat on a corner lot in Meadowbrook Estates, a quiet community of older homes where neighbors actually knew each other. The HOA rules were reasonable and clearly written. Livestock was permitted on properties over 2 acres, with proper fencing and housing. I had 3 acres and a detailed plan. I spent weeks building the perfect setup: strong wooden posts driven deep into the ground, heavy-duty wire fencing that would keep my goats safe and contained, a sturdy shelter with proper ventilation and clean bedding. Every detail was planned with love and care. When I finally brought home my 3 goats, it felt like coming full circle. Daisy, a gentle brown and white Nubian with long, floppy ears. Chester, a playful black and white boar who loved to climb on everything. And Luna, a tiny Nigerian dwarf with bright eyes and endless curiosity. My morning routine became sacred. I would wake up at sunrise, grab my feed buckets, and walk out to greet my little family. They would run to the fence when they saw me coming, their excited bleating filling the air. Chester would stand on his back legs, pressing his front hooves against the fence for attention. Luna would spin in circles, showing off for treats. Daisy would wait patiently, wise and gentle, for her share of grain and scratches behind the ears. The neighbors loved them too. Mrs. Peterson from next door would bring her grandchildren over to pet the goats and learn about farm animals. Tom and Sarah from across the street would stop by during their evening walks to say hello. The Johnsons invited me to their barbecue and asked endless questions about goat care. Everything was perfect, too perfect, I realize now. That is when I first saw her. Corinne Williams lived 4 houses down in a pristine white colonial with a magazine-perfect front yard. Not a single blade of grass out of place. Flower beds arranged like a museum display. Even her mailbox looked like it had been installed by a team of engineers. I was feeding the goats one morning when I noticed her car slow down as it passed my property. A white SUV with tinted windows, moving at a crawl. I could see her face through the windshield, hidden behind designer sunglasses, studying my fence like she was planning a military assault. She stopped completely, took out her phone, and started taking pictures. Not casual snapshots, but methodical documentation. She photographed my fence from multiple angles, my goat shelter, even my mailbox. Then she made notes on a legal pad, writing with the intensity of someone gathering evidence for a court case. Our eyes met for just a moment. She lowered her sunglasses and stared at me with the cold calculation of a predator studying its prey. Then she drove away without a word. I should have known right then that my peaceful life was about to end. 3 days later, Karen appeared at my front door. I was enjoying my morning coffee when I heard the sharp sound of high heels clicking across my wooden porch. Through the window, I could see her standing there with a manila folder clutched against her chest like armor. I opened the door and tried to smile. "Good morning, can I help you?" "I am Karen Williams, HOA Compliance Officer for Meadowbrook Estates." Her voice was crisp and professional, like a prosecutor reading charges. "We need to discuss your violation of community standards." She pushed past me without being invited, her heels clicking across my hardwood floors as she surveyed my living room with obvious disapproval. Everything about her was sharp and aggressive. Her blonde hair was pulled back so tightly it looked painful. Her makeup was applied with military precision. Even her handbag looked like a weapon. Violation. I followed her back to my kitchen, where she was already spreading documents across my table. "What violation?" "These." She slapped down a stack of photographs. "Pictures of my goats, my fence, my shelter. Livestock is prohibited in Meadowbrook Estates under Section 4.2 of the Community Standards." I blinked at her in confusion. "That is not correct. I read the HOA rules very carefully before I moved here. Livestock is specifically allowed on properties over 2 acres with proper fencing." Karen's smile was cold enough to freeze water. "The rules have been updated. Effective immediately, all livestock must be removed from community properties." "Updated when? I never received any notice of rule changes." "Notice was posted on the community bulletin board." She pointed at me with one perfectly manicured finger. "Ignorance of the rules is not an excuse for violation." I felt my heart rate climbing, but I kept my voice calm. "May I see a copy of these updated rules?" "They are still being finalized, but the livestock ban is in effect immediately." Karen gathered her photos and stood up, towering over me in her ridiculous heels. "You have 48 hours to remove all animals from your property." 48 hours, my voice cracked. "Even if what you are saying is true, I need time to find proper homes for my goats. These are living creatures, not furniture." "Not my problem." Karen headed for my front door, then turned back with that predatory smile. "Oh, and there will be daily fines of $500 for each day of noncompliance." My blood ran cold. $500 per day. That is $1,500 daily for 3 goats. Mathematics was never difficult for me. Karen paused at my door, clearly enjoying my panic. "I suggest you make some phone calls. Time is ticking." After she left, I sat at my kitchen table staring at the empty coffee cup in my hands. $1,500 per day. I could lose my house in a matter of weeks, but something about Karen's visit felt wrong. Too aggressive, too rushed, too convenient. I pulled out my laptop and started researching. The Meadowbrook Estates HOA website showed no recent rule changes. The Community Standards document was dated 2 years ago and clearly stated that livestock was permitted on properties over 2 acres. I called the HOA management company and spoke to their legal department. "No, ma'am," the secretary told me. "There have been no rule changes regarding livestock, and we do not have anyone named Karen Williams listed as a compliance officer." My hands started shaking. Karen had lied about everything. She had no authority, no legal standing, and no right to threaten me or my animals. But she had seemed so confident, so official. How many other neighbors had she intimidated with fake authority? I spent the next hour taking photographs of all the HOA documents and saving copies to my computer. Then I called a lawyer. If Karen wanted to play games with fake rules and imaginary fines, she was about to learn that some people fight back. But first, I had to protect my goats. If Karen was willing to lie about her authority, what else might she be willing to do? Karen did not wait for my 48-hour deadline. The harassment began the very next morning. I woke up to find her parked across the street from my house, sitting in her white SUV with a pair of binoculars and a legal pad. She was watching my property like a detective on a stakeout, writing down everything I did. When I walked out to feed my goats, she photographed me. When my neighbor Mrs. Peterson stopped by to chat, Karen photographed her too. The intimidation was deliberate and obvious. She wanted me to feel watched, hunted, violated in my own home. By noon, I had received 3 more violation notices slipped under my front door. Excessive noise from livestock, unsightly agricultural structures, failure to maintain aesthetic community standards. Each notice threatened escalating fines and legal action. I called my lawyer, David Chen, and read him the notices over the phone. "This is harassment," he said immediately. "Pure and simple. Save everything she gives you. Document every interaction. We are going to need evidence when we take her to court." Take her to court. David, I just want to keep my goats and live in peace. Peace is not what Karen Williams wants. She wants control. People like her do not stop until someone forces them to stop. That afternoon, a county animal control officer showed up at my door. A tired-looking man in a khaki uniform who seemed embarrassed by his visit. "Ma'am, we received a complaint about dangerous livestock on your property. I have to do an inspection." "Dangerous livestock," I laughed despite my anger. "Officer, I have 3 goats. The most dangerous thing they do is steal treats from each other." He spent 20 minutes examining my setup. Proper fencing, clean water, adequate shelter, healthy animals. His report concluded that my goats were well cared for and posed no danger to the community. "Whoever filed this complaint wasted everyone's time," he told me as he left. "Your animals are happier than most pets I see." But Karen was just getting started. Over the next week, I received visits from the county health department, the zoning office, and even the fire marshal. Each inspection found no violations. Each inspector seemed annoyed at being sent on a wild goose chase. But each visit cost me hours of lost work and increased stress. Karen escalated her surveillance too. She drove past my house every hour during daylight, slowing down to photograph any changes to my property. She recruited other neighbors to spy on me, spreading rumors that my goats carried diseases and lowered property values. The worst part was watching my animals suffer from the stress. Goats are sensitive creatures who pick up on human emotions. They started huddling together during the day, nervous and skittish when strangers approached. Chester stopped his playful climbing. Luna lost her appetite. Daisy watched the road with worried eyes, sensing danger she could not understand. I installed security cameras around my property and started keeping a detailed log of Karen's harassment. Time-stamped photos of her surveillance, audio recordings of her threatening phone calls, copies of every fake violation notice. My lawyer was building a case, but legal action takes time. Karen knew that. She was trying to break me financially and emotionally before I could fight back. 2 weeks into her campaign, I discovered the depth of her deception. Karen had created fake social media accounts to spread lies about me in local community groups. She posted photos of my goats with captions claiming they were aggressive and dangerous. She started rumors that I was running an illegal petting zoo and attracting vermin to the neighborhood. The lies worked. Neighbors who had been friendly before started avoiding me. Some crossed the street rather than walk past my property. Mrs. Peterson stopped bringing her grandchildren to visit the goats. But the worst revelation came from my neighbor Tom during a rare, friendly conversation. "You know," he said quietly, "Karen pulled this same stuff with the Martinez family 2 years ago. They had chickens. Beautiful coop, healthy birds, completely legal. But Karen made their lives so miserable they eventually moved away." "What happened to their chickens?" Tom's face darkened. Karen had them euthanized the day after the family left, claimed they were abandoned livestock. That night, I sat on my porch watching my goats sleep peacefully in their shelter. Karen was not just a busybody neighbor with too much time. She was a predator who destroyed families for sport, and she had killed innocent animals to prove her point. I made a decision that would change everything. Karen wanted a war. She was about to get one. I should have known Karen would not wait for legal proceedings. She had already proven she operated outside the law. What I did not expect was how far she would go to prove her imaginary authority. It was a Tuesday afternoon in late October. I had taken the day off work to meet with my lawyer about filing criminal charges against Karen for harassment and filing false reports. The meeting ran longer than expected, and I did not get home until almost 5 in the evening. As I turned into my driveway, I saw them immediately. 3 men with crowbars and wire cutters, systematically destroying my fence. My beautiful, carefully built fence that had taken weeks to construct was being ripped apart piece by piece. My goats were loose. Daisy, Chester, and Luna were running in panic circles around my front yard, bleating in terror as strangers destroyed their safe space. They had never been outside their fenced area before. They were confused, frightened, and heading straight for the busy road that ran past my property. Karen stood in the middle of the chaos like a general commanding her troops. She was pointing at specific sections of fence and directing the destruction with obvious satisfaction. When she saw my car, her smile widened like she was welcoming me to my own execution. I slammed on my brakes and jumped out of my car, my heart hammering with panic and rage. "Stop!" I screamed, running toward the men with crowbars. "What are you doing? Stop destroying my fence!" One of the workers looked confused and lowered his crowbar. "Ma'am, we were told this was an emergency HOA action. Dangerous livestock containment failure." "Emergency action." I spun toward Karen, who was now recording everything with her phone. "You have no authority to do this. This is destruction of private property." Karen held up a clipboard with official-looking documents. "I have emergency authorization from the HOA board to remove dangerous livestock containment that threatens community safety." "That is completely fake. You are not an HOA officer. You have no authority." But the workers were already confused and nervous. They had been lied to, manipulated into committing a crime they did not understand. Karen had probably paid them cash and told them some story about dangerous animals and community emergency. While I argued with Karen, my worst fear almost came true. Luna, my smallest goat, panicked and ran directly toward the road. A pickup truck was speeding down the hill, the driver not expecting to see livestock in the roadway. Time slowed to a crawl. I could see the truck's headlights growing larger. I could hear Luna's frightened bleating. I could see the driver's face through the windshield, eyes wide with shock as he slammed on his brakes. I dove toward Luna, wrapping my arms around her small body and rolling both of us into the ditch beside the road. The truck's tires screamed against the asphalt as it skidded past us, missing my head by inches. I lay in the dirt holding my trembling goat, both of us breathing hard from terror and adrenaline. Luna could have been killed. I could have been killed. All because Karen wanted to prove she had power over her neighbors. The truck driver pulled over and jumped out, his face pale with shock. "Are you okay? I did not see her until the last second." "We are fine," I managed, though my hands were shaking uncontrollably. "Thank you for stopping." Karen, meanwhile, had continued recording the entire incident. She was probably hoping one of my goats would get hurt so she could claim they were dangerous and needed to be destroyed. I gathered my 3 terrified animals and managed to get them safely into my garage while I figured out what to do next. Then I called the police. 911, what is your emergency? Someone is destroying my property and nearly killed my livestock. I need officers here immediately. But when the police arrived 20 minutes later, Karen had already called them with her own version of events. She told them I was keeping dangerous animals that had escaped and threatened public safety. She showed them her fake documents and played the recording of Luna running toward the road. The officers were confused by the conflicting stories, but they seemed to take Karen more seriously than me. She was well-dressed, well-spoken, and had official-looking paperwork. I was covered in dirt from diving into a ditch, emotional from trauma, and trying to explain a complex harassment campaign. "Ma'am," one officer said to me, "do you have proper permits for these animals?" "I do not need permits. Goats are legal on my property under county and HOA rules." "But this lady says the HOA has banned livestock." I felt like screaming. Even the police were falling for Karen's lies. She had created such a convincing performance that trained officers could not see through her deception. As the sun set and the police finished their reports, I stood in my garage with my 3 traumatized goats and surveyed the wreckage of my fence. Months of work destroyed in one afternoon. Thousands of dollars in damage. And Karen was probably at home celebrating her victory. But she had made one crucial mistake. She had committed multiple felonies in front of witnesses, and I had recorded everything on my security cameras. The war was just beginning. The next morning, my kitchen table looked like the command center for a military operation. Legal documents, photographs, video files, and evidence folders covered every inch of space. I had barely slept, but my mind was crystal clear. Karen had crossed a line that could not be uncrossed. My lawyer David arrived at 8 a.m. with coffee and a briefcase full of legal ammunition. "Show me everything," he said, settling into a chair across from me. I walked him through the timeline. Karen's fake authority claims, the harassment campaign, the false reports to county agencies, and finally, the illegal destruction of my fence that nearly killed my goats. David's expression grew darker with each piece of evidence. This is not just harassment anymore. This is criminal destruction of property, filing false police reports, and reckless endangerment. We are talking about felony charges. Can we prove she has no authority? Already done. David pulled out a letter from his briefcase. I contacted the HOA management company's corporate headquarters yesterday. Karen Williams has never held any position with Meadowbrook Estates HOA. She is not a compliance officer, not a board member, not even a volunteer. She is just a resident who decided to invent her own authority. The relief was overwhelming. All of Karen's threats, all of her official-sounding demands, all of her emergency authorizations were complete fiction. She was nothing more than a neighbor with a God complex and too much time on her hands. But David's next revelation was even more important. I also spoke with 3 other families in your neighborhood who have dealt with Corinne's harassment in the past. The Martinez family with the chickens was just the beginning. She has been terrorizing residents for years, always targeting people with animals or property modifications she personally dislikes. He handed me a folder containing written statements from former neighbors. Story after story of Corinne's fake authority, harassment campaigns, and vindictive destruction. A family with backyard chickens who moved away after months of abuse. An elderly man who grew vegetables in his front yard until Corinne had them declared a health hazard. A young couple who kept rescue cats until Corinne reported them for running an illegal shelter. Why has no one stopped her before? Because she is smart about choosing her targets. Young families, elderly people, anyone who seems vulnerable or unlikely to fight back. And she escalates slowly, wearing people down over time until they give up and move away. I thought about Mrs. Peterson, my elderly neighbor who had stopped bringing her grandchildren to visit my goats. How many other neighbors were afraid of Corinne, but too intimidated to speak up? That afternoon, I installed additional security cameras and began a systematic documentation project. Every time Corinne drove past my house, I recorded it. Every fake violation notice she left, I photographed and filed. Every lie she spread on social media, I screenshot and saved. But Corinne was not done with her assault. She escalated to direct property damage. 3 days after the fence destruction, I found spray paint on my rebuilt fence. The words "Dangerous ANIMALS" in red letters across the wooden posts I had just finished installing. My security cameras caught Corinne sneaking onto my property at 3 a.m. with a spray paint can. The next week, someone dumped bleach into my goat's water trough. The cameras caught Corinne again, this time wearing dark clothes and a baseball cap, but her face was clearly visible in the infrared footage. I called David immediately. She is trying to poison my animals. This has gone beyond harassment into attempted animal cruelty. We have her on camera committing multiple felonies. It is time to involve the district attorney. While David prepared criminal charges, I made copies of everything and delivered them to the Meadowbrook Estates HOA board. The real board, not Corinne's imaginary authority. Board President Jennifer Walsh was horrified by the evidence. We had no idea this was happening. Corinne has been telling everyone she works for us, but she has never even attended a board meeting. She has been using your HOA's name to terrorize residents for years. Not anymore. Jennifer's voice was steel. We are banning her from all HOA property and sending cease and desist letters to every resident explaining that she has no authority whatsoever. But the most satisfying discovery came from an unexpected source: Corinne's own husband. Robert Williams appeared at my door on a Friday evening, looking exhausted and embarrassed. He was a quiet man who worked long hours and rarely interacted with neighbors. "I need to apologize for my wife," he said simply, "and I need to tell you some things you should know." Robert explained that Corinne had driven away 3 different families from their previous neighborhood with similar harassment campaigns. She had a pattern of targeting anyone who did not meet her personal standards for community perfection. "I have tried to stop her," he said quietly, "but she becomes obsessed with these crusades. She spends hours planning her next move, researching legal loopholes, building files on neighbors she wants to destroy." "Why are you telling me this?" Robert looked directly at me for the first time. "Because you are the first person who has fought back, and I think maybe it is time someone held her accountable." As Robert walked back to his house, I realized something important had shifted. Corinne's reign of terror was about to end. But first, the universe had one more surprise in store for both of us. Sometimes the universe has a sense of humor about delivering justice. I learned this lesson on a crisp November morning when my goats taught Corinne Williams what real consequences looked like. It started with Chester's curiosity. My playful black and white boar goat had always been an escape artist, testing every inch of fencing for weaknesses. I had reinforced my rebuilt fence carefully, but Chester found something I had missed. A small gap where the fence met the corner of my property. Not big enough for a person to notice, but exactly the right size for a determined goat to squeeze through. And beyond that gap lay the crown jewel of Meadowbrook Estates, Corinne's prize-winning garden. I discovered the situation when I went out for morning feeding and found my goat pen empty. For a heart-stopping moment, I panicked. Had Corinne stolen my animals? Had they wandered into traffic? Then I heard the sound of happy munching coming from the direction of Corinne's house. I followed the sound and found all three of my goats in garden paradise. Corinne's backyard was a magazine-perfect display of imported roses, exotic flowering bushes, and meticulously maintained flower beds. She had spent thousands of dollars creating a botanical showcase that was the envy of the entire neighborhood. Chester was systematically working his way through a row of prize-winning hybrid tea roses, eating the blooms with obvious delight. Luna was standing on her hind legs, reaching up to sample the leaves of an expensive Japanese maple. Daisy had discovered the herb garden and was methodically destroying months of careful cultivation. My first instinct was to immediately retrieve my animals and repair whatever damage they had caused. But then I saw Corinne's garden gate standing wide open. The same woman who had destroyed my fence was too careless to properly secure her own property. The same woman who claimed my animals were dangerous had left her precious garden completely unprotected. The irony was too perfect to ignore. I pulled out my phone and started recording. If Corinne could document everything for her fake harassment campaign, I could document this moment of natural justice. That is when Corinne discovered the situation. Her scream of rage could probably be heard 3 blocks away. She came running from her house in a silk bathrobe and designer slippers, waving her arms like she was trying to scare away demons. "Get them out! Get them out of my garden right now!" Chester looked up from a particularly delicious rose bush, chewed thoughtfully, and returned to his meal. Luna flicked her ears in Corinne's direction, but continued browsing the herb garden. Daisy did not even acknowledge the screaming human interrupting her breakfast. "Your goats are destroying my garden." Corinne was practically foaming at the mouth. "This is thousands of dollars in damage." I kept recording as I walked calmly into the garden. "I am so sorry, Corinne. I will collect my animals immediately. But I have to ask, how did they get into your garden? Is your fence damaged?" "My fence is fine. They must have broken through somehow." I walked over to examine her garden gate, which was clearly standing wide open. "Actually, it looks like your gate was not latched properly. These animals just walked through an open gate onto unfenced property." Corinne's face turned an interesting shade of purple. "That is impossible. I always secure my garden." "Well, the gate is open now, and since there is no fence or barrier preventing access, my goats technically just wandered onto open ground." I smiled at her with the same cold satisfaction she had shown me during the fence destruction. Of course, if there had been proper fencing, this never would have happened. The beauty of the situation was not lost on either of us. Corinne had spent months claiming my fencing was inadequate and dangerous. Now her own lack of proper barriers had led to the destruction of her most prized possession. Chester had moved on to a section of imported English lavender that probably cost more per plant than most people spend on groceries. Luna was sampling ornamental grasses that Karen had special ordered from a boutique nursery. Daisy was working her way through a collection of heirloom herbs that had taken 2 years to establish. "I am calling the police." Karen pulled out her phone with shaking hands. "This is destruction of property." "Absolutely," I agreed. "You should definitely call them. I am sure they will be very interested in how this happened, especially since I have been documenting all of your harassment and illegal activities." Karen's phone call was exactly as dramatic as expected. She screamed about dangerous livestock, property damage, and demanding immediate arrests. But when the officers arrived, they found a very different situation than she had described. 3 peaceful goats enjoying a garden buffet through an unsecured gate. No broken fences, no aggressive animals, no immediate danger to anyone. Just the natural consequences of poor property management. Officer Martinez, who had responded to Karen's previous false reports, looked around the garden with barely concealed amusement. "Ma'am," he said to Karen, "it appears your gate was left open, and these animals simply wandered onto unfenced property. Without proper barriers, this is essentially an attractive nuisance situation." Attractive nuisance, what does that mean? It means if you leave your property unsecured and someone else's animals wander in, you bear some responsibility for the consequences. I finally gathered my well-fed goats and led them back through the gap in my fence, which I immediately repaired. As we walked away, Karen was left standing in the ruins of her perfect garden, surrounded by the evidence of her own carelessness. Chester looked back over his shoulder at the destroyed flower beds and bleated what sounded remarkably like satisfaction. Even my goats understood that justice had been served. The criminal charges against Karen Williams were filed 3 days after the Great Garden incident. Armed with months of evidence, video footage, and witness statements, the district attorney had enough material to prosecute multiple felonies. Destruction of property, filing false police reports, criminal harassment, trespassing, attempted animal cruelty. The list of charges read like a catalog of neighborhood terrorism. Karen's response was exactly what I expected. She hired an expensive lawyer and claimed she was the real victim. She filed counter-charges alleging that I had deliberately released my goats to destroy her garden. She demanded compensation for the plant damage and threatened to sue me for emotional distress. But her legal strategy collapsed the moment my attorney presented the evidence. Security camera footage showing Karen destroying my fence. Recordings of her admitting she had no HOA authority. Documentation proving she had filed false reports with county agencies. Written statements from other neighbors describing years of harassment. The judge was not impressed with Karen's defense. During the preliminary hearing, she actually interrupted Karen's lawyer to ask, "Are you seriously arguing that your client had the right to destroy someone else's property based on imaginary authority?" Karen's lawyer had no good answer. The HOA board took decisive action as well. They sent a formal letter to every resident explaining that Karen Williams had never held any position with the association and had been impersonating an official for years. They banned her from attending meetings, using HOA property, or claiming any association with the organization. More importantly, other neighbors finally started speaking up. The Martinez family wrote a letter to the district attorney describing Karen's harassment campaign that drove them from their home. Mrs. Peterson provided a statement about how Karen had intimidated her into avoiding my property. Even some of Karen's former allies admitted they had been afraid to oppose her because of her vindictive reputation. The civil lawsuit was settled out of court. Karen's insurance company, faced with overwhelming evidence of intentional criminal acts, agreed to pay for all damages to my property plus punitive damages for harassment and emotional distress. The settlement was substantial enough to completely rebuild my fence with premium materials, expand my goat shelter, and purchase additional land adjacent to my property. My 3 acres became 5 acres, with room for my goats to roam freely and safely. Corinne and her husband moved away 2 months later. Robert had finally found the courage to leave a toxic marriage, and Corinne could not afford the house payments without his income. Their departure was quiet and quick, like criminals fleeing in the night. The neighborhood transformed back into the peaceful community it was meant to be. Children played in yards again. Neighbors walked their dogs without fear. The community garden project that Corinne had shut down with fake authority was revived and thriving. My goats became local celebrities. Chester, Luna, and Daisy were featured in the county newspaper as the heroes who brought down a neighborhood tyrant. Families drove from other towns to meet the famous garden-destroying goats and hear their story. I used part of the settlement money to establish a legal fund for other families dealing with HOA harassment and fake authority abuse. Because Corinne Williams was not unique. There are bullies in every community who use fear and intimidation to control their neighbors. But now those bullies know that sometimes karma comes with hooves and an appetite for prize-winning roses. My goats still graze peacefully in their expanded pasture every morning. And every morning, I remember that standing up to bullies is always worth the fight.